But is it a fair criticism to say that this wall system failed Israel?
You had so many people come through at one time, and obviously there are questions about was there an intelligence failure here and on whose part.
Welcome to No Border, No Country. We're talking today about war in the Middle East, how it affects border security there and here, as well as a lot of other immigration issues going on in this country. And we've got the ideal guest for that, I think, today. Jennie Taer is the investigative reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation. Anyone who looks at your work will see that you're really covering this situation in the Middle East right now, but you've also done quite a bit of coverage on the immigration issue. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So you were telling me before we came on the air about what's going on over there. It's a personal thing for you, and you're also covering it very closely. Tell us a little bit about how this situation is affecting you and what's going on over there in terms of just the disaster of it all.
Yeah. So obviously, you have a situation where Hamas terrorists went into Israel and breached the border there and wreaked havoc. Basically, something that's not even akin to animalistic behavior, like monsters, going after civilians, beheading children, babies, kidnapping the elderly and the young and families, and slaughtering like a massacre that we've just never seen. And yes, it is personal for me. I'm Jewish. This is an attack against my people. I have family in Israel. Many of the, people I know have been called to the reserves to fight this right now. And of course, there are, my cousins, my family are at home with their babies, holding them close in the bomb shelters. And my friends in Tel Aviv, while the men go off to fight this in war, and that's what's happened.
Mm-hmm. So we follow this along immigration lines in particular, and one of the things that we've seen is that there's been talk about how did Israel's border fence and wall system hold up during all of this, and we've seen this video of this bulldozer plowing through this wall. What do you think of this? Because what's your impression of the media coverage of it? Is it a fair criticism to say that this wall system failed Israel as a result of this?
I think that what we saw is just this mass breach. You had so many people come through at one time, and obviously there are questions about was there an intelligence failure here and on whose part. You have Egyptian officials saying that Israel may have known about this attack, but we're just not clear on all of the details, right? And of course you have the possible involvement of Iran here. But yes, this was such a massive breach. And also a breach of this really intense electric fence. At this point, things are back to the fence is back to having electricity, which the terrorists were able to disable during this attack. So it goes beyond just the physical aspect of this.
Mm-hmm. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I assume you're going to know a fair amount about this, but was the wall ever built there, or the wall system, was it ever built with the design that it would repel something like this, or was it more to discourage the foot traffic that has normally been the case?
So Israel has had a number of intifadas. The Palestinians' uprising is what they call it. Some of those have involved suicide bombings, and major reasons for that wall being erected is because of that, to protect Israeli citizens from those actors entering the country. And of course, the country has checkpoints within its borders to ensure that people don't get to anywhere further in the country if they're able to get through the wall. There's really intense security, and it has been effective for so many years. But something like this, again, you had a mass number of people breaching several areas of this wall and taking, everything that stood in the way after the wall as security, going into the military bases and killing the soldiers who are the next line of defense. It goes so much beyond this.
Now, people who follow this program know, we've talked about it in the last few weeks, we had a team travel to Israel in June, and they got a very extensive tour from the IDF forces of the fence system over there. And Matt O'Brien, my co-host, compared it to what we have here, or what we don't have here. What, if anything, can we learn from what's going on over there now as far as the vital importance of border security, how it's really not, it's not a political debate point. It's a matter of existential function of a country.
Sure. Well, every country has its reasons for border security. We all have our unique set of threats, right? And so in this country, of course, that is a question because you've seen a surge in people coming that are on the terror watch list. You have special interest aliens that come from countries of national security concern. These are all things that have been raised as a reason to enhance border security. And that was actually brought up after 9/11 in the commission report. And what it said, you know, there was an entire commission report specifically based on like the immigration patterns here. And so the southern border was an area that in this report, they said, you know, we need more security here. We already have a lot of illegal immigration that we're concerned about happening. And to think that at that point, it was of concern. And now look at where we are. We have record illegal immigration, 2.2 million in just fiscal year 2022. That's the highest year ever on record. And then, of course, this year, already 1.8 million plus. Of course, you have gotaways that we just don't know about.
Right. Now, a cynic or a skeptic may look at this discussion and say, well, we're talking about two very different situations because Israel's got very hostile actors right on the other side of their borders. There's these long simmering conflicts, and now it's come to a head now. But what about with our country? You mentioned the gotaways. We've got a growing number of people who are on terror watch lists who are getting into this country and are just melting into the public or into the society. How vulnerable is America to something far more sinister than anything we've seen up till now here as a result of that? I mean, what kind of threat are we talking about?
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's a really good point. You know, CNN reported just a few months ago that you had an ISIS sympathizer who was smuggling Uzbeki migrants into the country. Well, we don't know where they are currently. Like, no one has apprehended those people, and they're searching for them. The FBI is looking for them. That's of concern when you talk about these issues. Then there was a situation that was actually brought up going back to the 9/11 commission reports about some Salvadoran migrants that were actually here in the D.C. area and the DMV area in Virginia, in Falls Church, Virginia, that were recruited by the terrorists during 9/11 to basically provide their identities and to help obtain ID documents. They were at a 7-Eleven in Falls Church, Virginia. So these are very concerning stories you hear. And of course, what do we not know? We talk about gotaways, but we don't know what we don't know, right? And that's the situation here. It's not just that you have drugs coming across. It's not just people coming across, turning themselves in. That's what you see. But as a journalist, if I go out, I try to document, you know, sometimes I'll ask some of my sources down there, hey, let's go see some of the runners. Let's go see some of the gotaways. And they're like, I mean, you can't because this is the point. They're gotaways. And that's exactly the situation here. Yes, they're caught on cameras. That's how we know they exist and sensors. But when you have the Border Patrol tied up processing these huge groups of people, that's when you have these open, porous areas of our southern border.
It seems like prior to 9/11, now that we know what happened after that, people say, well, that pre-9/11 stage, we were really on this vacation from reality. We just had this false sense of security that we couldn't be attacked like that here on our homeland. And then it happened. And then it seemed like everyone was super vigilant, including our government. But now, fast forward to today, yes, we're aware of certain threats, but with respect to the border, we've had this sort of fashionable anti-borders sentiment among people in our government, people in this activist base, and they make it all about, well, you're mean to people if you don't let them all in. Doesn't this bring it right back to square one, though, as far as this is not just some esoteric faculty lounge discussion. We're talking about lives here. We're talking about life and death.
Exactly, exactly. And if we want to take it back to this conflict in Israel, to the war in Israel, Hamas has its own leaders that are trying to activate its followers in the West and across the world to go after people and to counter everyone that is against their ideology. And by counter, I mean kill and slaughter and murder. And, you know, we're already seeing calls for uprisings like that in the United States. You know, with this current war, you have groups like Students for Justice in Palestine on college campuses calling for intifada, or groups in Sydney, Australia calling for the gassing of the Jews. This is an attack that is reverberating across the world, and it's something that is cause for concern in this country as well, where we have specific areas that are very open to people, specifically bad actors.
Yeah, and I remember, too, that after 9/11, I mean, sparked a massive investigation on how these people got in. A lot of them got in on student visas. A lot of them were visa overstays. And I don't know if you recall, I think it was like 6 months after 9/11, Mohammed Atta's last known address got a letter from, I forget which agency, announcing to him, congratulations, your request to extend your visa has been approved, or something like that. It was just so grotesque to show how behind the ball our agencies were at that point. And now you look at, with the gotaways, at least with the case of the 9/11 hijackers, we had some sense that we know when they came in the country and under what pretense. With these people, we don't know anything about them. They just snuck right in. I mean, we don't know who they are, where they're from, what their records are, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and the job of Interior Immigration Enforcement is tasked to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That agency, we focus a lot on Border Patrol, as we should, but that agency right now, a lot of the ICE officers I talk to that are tasked with deportation, arrests, things like that, they're sitting behind their desks right now doing processing, because when you have the overwhelming number of people coming across that are getting these documents that say report to ICE for your court date, it's adding an extra layer. They have to go to ICE, and ICE is sitting behind the desk giving them their paperwork. And on top of that, when they can and if they can make arrests and deportations, you have a set of priorities that the Biden administration has created that says a specific group of threats are classified to, you know, they say it's prosecutorial discretion. We don't have the resources to be able to arrest everyone and to deport everyone that's here illegally, or that is a visa overstay or things like that. The priorities are to these severe threats. I mean, I've heard stories from these ICE officers that, you know, hey, like, I had to let this guy go because, shoot, like, we couldn't get the approval. We couldn't get it to fit into this set of priorities that they've created that are threats to national security, border security, and public safety. And it's such a broad set of terms that everyone interprets it differently, creates confusion in ICE offices. But of course, at the end of the day, it limits who they can go after.
Do you recall a couple of years ago this sort of anti-borders movement, as what we call them? It was very fashionable. They had this rallying cry, defund ICE. Remember that? AOC was saying this a lot. Defund ICE. I think, tell me what you think. I think to just do that or disband ICE, it was far too radical a move. So what they do in a much more sinister way, we're going to increase the funding of ICE, but we're going to gut it from the inside, and we're going to change its mission, and we're going to demoralize the agents on the inside that are really looking to enforce the law, so that you haven't taken it away. It's still there, but it's a shell of what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And everyone there has either been run off who doesn't agree with the new mission, or they've been assigned to an administrative job where they can't really make a difference. And this is how permanent Washington deals with a problem like this now. They don't just get rid of the agency. They twist it and turn it from the inside, so it's nothing that you recognize.
Right, exactly. And there's also a number of ICE, there's a number of Biden administration officials, some tasked with immigration policy, that have worked with groups that endorse these kind of anti-ICE calls or anti-policing calls, which is concerning because this is a policing agency, this is a law enforcement agency. You had this individual, Ramzi Qassem, who was in the White House doing immigration policy, who was one of those individuals for a while. And of course, now he's at the City University of New York, and he's causing problems there too, especially with the conflict in Israel. He's definitely not a big supporter of Israel. He defended Gitmo detainees, things like that, in his law career. But these are kinds of the people who are running the show, doing reports on how partnering with groups that were Abolish ICE activists, and some folks like Claire Trickler McNulty, who works at ICE and is tasked with contracts. She has to give a signature on contract approval requests for detention and alternatives to detention. She worked for a group that shields migrants from deportation, specifically children, kids in need of defense.
So it's not really shocking to say nowadays confidence by the public in our law enforcement agencies is not where it should be. And there's some very good reasons why that is. People think our agencies are too political, they're too agenda-driven, and it seems like they're going after the wrong people. A lot of people perceive this, that they're going after political enemies rather than real enemies of the country. You see this with the president right now saying the number one threat to America is white supremacy. Okay, you can have that discussion, but does anyone really think that is the most threatening thing to this country? You're going to get a lot of debate on whether that's true or not. So given all of that, in your reporting, do you get a sense that Washington, and by that I mean the federal government, the leadership, are they really aware of these problems we're talking about, these gotaways, these terror threats within the country? Are they prioritizing this? Are they giving it the proper attention?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that there is just a blame game that's distracting from all of this. You have the White House, the president saying this is Congress's problem. They haven't done anything. They haven't passed immigration reform. This is on them. Well, Congress is saying, the Republicans in Congress are saying this is the president's policies. This comes from the top. So I think they're so caught up in that mess. And then, of course, right now we don't have a speaker, as we're recording this, a speaker of the House. And there has been a lot of conflict over that. Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of out of touchness when it comes to what our leaders in Washington believe and what's actually going on. For example, the Biden administration says that its legal pathways, its expansion, the greatest expansion in the history of our country, of legal pathways for entry for migrants is a success, that it's, stopping the flow, in their words, at the border. Okay, well, I'll show you something here. I have an entire bag here just from one trip to the border, Eagle Pass, Texas, a couple weeks ago when I was down there. These are all documents confirming that migrants who had crossed illegally had appointments at the ports of entry for CBP1, which is the phone app they're able to use to book those entry appointments and gain access to the country. And as people were crossing illegally and as these documents were ripped up and dumped along the Rio Grande down there, you also had people still coming across the port every day that were CBP1 a couple times a day. So is it working? The migrants themselves say no. The tatters of these documents say no. And of course the numbers tell us no. So that's the situation,
Could you hold a couple of those up to the camera? I don't want people to think you just ripped up a bunch of papers before the show. I want to show that
Sure.
These are legitimate.
Yeah, of course. So some of these are the registration confirmations. You also have they're so ripped up. I mean, these people clearly wanted to get rid of these documents and dump them immediately. I mean, they're covered in dirt, essentially.
Hold that up. Let the camera get that.
Here, let me make sure it's right. They're so hard to read, too. So here's some of them. You can see this one has the signature of CBP at the bottom. This is one of the registration documents here. And then, of course, you know, in addition to this being along the border, you also have everyone dumping their IDs as well, which when you talk about the terrorism aspect and the concerns about national security, you know, why are people dumping their identification documents?
Did you see any of the colored wristbands down there?
I didn't, but when you talk about those, you know, and the kind of smuggler aspect and the controlled flow, it's absolutely controlled in that area in Eagle Pass. You have Piedras Negras, which is across from Eagle Pass in Mexico. They're watching the situation where you have federal versus state authorities. You have Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who erected all of that concertina wire, his National Guard soldiers saying, do not come. This is an illegal point. You need to cross at the port. This is not where you should cross. It's dangerous. And then, as soon as Border Patrol's done processing their last group, they come over and cut the wire because that group is on the U.S. side and they are required to do that. However, it is this battle, and the migrant seize on that, and the smuggler seize on that. Once a group gets through that process, the next one comes, because what were they doing as that was all happening in Mexico on the Mexican side of the river? They were watching, and they know exactly what to do. And it's very tragic to see, because I saw a lot of women and children, a lot of pregnant women, and they are, you know, pushed to the front of those groups. And the National Guard troops down there were saying they were really using them to get them to cut the wire and to persuade them. And so it's a very tragic situation at the end of the day.
Right. And you hear so much now, too, that there are some women and children, like you said. A lot of these people are, to use that term we hear so often, military-age men, military-age fighting men. Isn't it strange that there's such a preponderance of people in that category versus any of the other demographic groups?
Sure, it's largely adult men in their 20s. It tends to be that are coming alone, and a lot of them don't qualify for asylum. You
Majority.
know, as journalists, we can talk to them pretty frankly. We can have the conversations. When they go to Border Patrol, it may be a different story, because then they're talking to the people that they're trying to get them to release them eventually into the country. And so every time I ask, I'm like, why are you here? And it's always about work. And so I'll even ask, like, asylum? Are you coming for asylum? Do you need asylum? No. Or, you know, it's just not a threat that would meet the asylum category, because it's a very specific set of parameters. And so a lot of these people don't qualify. And that's the situation we have on our hands, is people that are coming here, getting released, that are not meeting the terms of release, right? There are people that need asylum in this world. There are horrible things that happen in this world. There are people that are persecuted and that have legitimate threats against them. And those people are also having to be part of this process, but also maybe are held up because of this process. We just don't have the resources now to mitigate all of this.
We've covered this a lot in the past. The cartel members, other groups down there will coach a lot of these migrants to say the so-called magic words to get them through that first stage of asylum. But as you say, a lot of them are really not there for legitimate asylum cases.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've seen things that are very concerning to me. You know, I follow a lot of these migrants after they cross. I have their phone numbers. I talk to them on WhatsApp. I follow what happens in the process, so I can understand as a journalist, you know, what goes beyond the border. And everyone I've talked to is in the country, was released. is maybe in a sanctuary city, is somewhere across the country, California, New York, all of these places. I've seen some at the border. I did see something a little concerning when I was down in El Paso a few months ago. There was a migrant who had teardrop tattoos, which signals that you may have killed someone. And the next day I saw he had Band-Aids over them. Then later learning from the gang task force in El Paso later that there are active members of a Venezuelan gang, El Tren de Aragua, that have come through that area and are known to have gotten in through the border there. It's very concerning what's happening.
Given the time you've spent down there, it seems like you'd be a great person to ask this question. Matt and I have often talked about this. Where do so many of those migrants get those phones? Because you see these videos, a lot of them look like they have very nice looking iPhones and other things. Where are they getting these phones? Who's paying for the calling plans? What do you know about that?
I can tell you that there's a lot of migrants that come with their smartphones, right? And that's a key tool to the smuggling aspect of this. There's so much information that they get from TikTok and YouTube and Facebook that they see and consume, showing them exactly where to cross, where people are successfully getting through. They see it all. They know what's going on. And then if you want to talk about this other government provided phone from ICE, this is part of the Alternatives to Detention program, which I mentioned earlier. Migrants who are released into the country who are not being detained are sometimes given either an ankle monitor, are told to download this phone app, or receive a phone that has that same tool on it to track them. So the phone is supposed to only have that tracking technology on it, and that's the purpose it serves. So they are given those phones sometimes, but of course they do have information that they're consuming on their own phones that is actually fueling more people to come and fueling the smugglers and, their money-making machine. It really is an industry for them.
I'm Tom Homan. The Biden administration is reversing America's progress on immigration, reversing ICE's ability to deport criminal illegal aliens, reversing job protections for Americans, and construction of the wall. That's why I've joined EARLY, the Immigration Reform Law Institute. EARLY uses the courts to stop bad immigration policies. Join me. Support EARLY at early.org. Help win the immigration fight in the courtroom. Paid for by the Immigration Reform Law Institute.
And we're back with Jennie Taer from the Daily Caller News Foundation. Thanks, Jennie, for coming again. I wanted to get your take because you are a member of the media, and I wanted to discuss how the media is covering this all-important issue of immigration. And it seems like the establishment media, and by that I mean the big ones, the corporate media, they've always covered this issue, in my view, as a human rights issue, that there's people on the other side of the border from horrible conditions, and we sort of owe it to them in some way to bring them here no matter what the circumstances, that it's just, we're so fortunate here and we owe it to them. Okay, fine. But fast forward now to today, we've had 3 years of the most loose border policy anyone can remember. We're seeing these cities being overcrowded. We're seeing our local budgets being devastated by the cost of taking this on. Are you seeing any change in the way the media is covering this issue given that, or is it strictly abiding by that framework they've used up till now?
I think that there has been a little bit of a shift in how it's been covered, and the reason that is, I think, is because of this effort that started in Texas of sending buses to sanctuary cities, buses of migrants, unannounced, and just putting them in the middle of Manhattan, Chicago, all over the country, Philly, Los Angeles, And then you had others taking part in this. You had Governor Ron DeSantis from Florida sending flights of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, showing that these people who had once invited this kind of effort were absolutely eating their words. And what I mean by that is perfectly shown in the Martha's Vineyard example, because you had a few migrants show up there to this place that is very resourced, very rich. You know, Obama has a house there, right? And they said, what can we do to get these people out?
Exactly.
That was like the response immediately. And they did. And then you had New York City now, and they said, we're a sanctuary city and we have the right to shelter and we have all these things. And then the flood came, and now you have Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, saying, shoot, I got to go to Central America now and address the root causes of migration, which is Kamala Harris's job, the vice president. He went down there and tried to send this message, don't come to his sanctuary city. It's almost comical, but it is something that started with Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Yes, I want to get to Adams in Latin America, but to your point, we've said this here before also, the busing thing was a game changer because it really put the sanctuary policies to the test. These mayors were living rent-free for many years on the rhetoric that we're welcoming, we support everyone. Now walk the talk, and we've seen they really can't. And to your point about Martha's Vineyard, that had to be one of the juiciest pieces of video I've ever seen, where one of the people in the welcoming committee at the island there, they were saying, well, welcome, all this, and then someone asked them, well, where are you planning on putting them? And instinctively it was, well, they can't stay here. We're going to figure something out, but they can't stay here. So it just exposed this hypocrisy that, oh, we want them, but not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly it. I even went to Delaware at the time because there was talk of maybe a surprise transport of migrants to Delaware, right? Biden's state. And I just remember interviewing people there. I did kind of like this man on the street, and everyone said, well, we don't have room for them here. We don't have anything for them here. Like, why would they come here? And I just remember thinking, like, how crazy, because anytime these people have advocated for, you know, sheltering an outsider, being being someone who's open to other people and diversity, and then being so shocked by these efforts to do just that, to bring what these people have said they're advocates for. Whether you like it or not, like you said, Abbott's program was very effective. And by the way, quietly, there have been Democrat-run areas of the country that are doing the same thing. Colorado, for example. Arizona still does it. Even after Governor Doug Ducey left office, Katie Hobbs, the governor there, is busing migrants. So this is not just a red issue now.
Yeah. I wanted to read you an excerpt from one of your articles. This one is titled, Dem Mayor to Travel to Latin America to Discourage Migrants from Coming to His Sanctuary City. This was from October 4th. This is something that Adams said, and I want to ask you about this. So here it is. Adams said, we're going to tell them what the real conditions are, meaning in New York. The large number of thousands of people are living in congregate settings. We know that there's a propaganda machine that basically it has given the false promise of what life is like of being a migrant and asylum seeker. And we want to be honest with those who live in these regions, Adams said. What propaganda machine is he referring to, and who is running it? Because he's pro-sanctuary, technically. Mm-hmm. So who is he referring to when he says they're selling them a dream with this propaganda machine? Right,
exactly. I think also, if Adams wants to address some of these roots of this issue, there are a lot of non-governmental organizations, be it south of the border or just a little bit north of the border, that help these migrants, that do provide them some resources on areas that are open to them and that have resources there. That's something that's been for a while, so he is yet to talk about that. But in an effort to squash some of this, he did not only go to Latin America, but for months he has been deploying flyers to the southern border to say, do not come to New York City. We don't have room for you, and there's nothing here for you. They're still all going there. They're still, they're going where the resources are. They're going to New York City. They're going to Portland, Maine. They're going to Chicago, which is now having to increase budget flow towards this issue. And it's stretching the budgets of these cities. And they've had to cut city programs in New York City to be able to support this. And you're seeing outcry from residents in these democratic cities that voted for these policies. It's really creating this uproar and chaos.
Another aspect of this that we've discussed here is that Adams and other, like Lori Lightfoot did this in Chicago also, they will blame Abbott and DeSantis for sending this plague onto them, essentially. But the reality is, for all their grandstanding about being a sanctuary city all these years, if you took these people who cross the border and ask them, where do you want to go? They're likely to say New York, Chicago, places like this, because they probably have family members or people they know who went there because of the sanctuary policies originally. So for them to say, we were just fine until that, their sanctuary preening brought this on in a sense, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the majority of the people that I talk to after they cross, why are you coming? Like, why are you going to Kansas? Why are you going to New York? Why are you going to Miami? Because they're family there. And they went through the same process. I always ask them because you want to know, like, what's the pull factor? The administration, Mayorkas, they all talk about all the push factors, all the things that are leading them to leave and all the issues. But what are some of these pull factors? That's a big thing, is family that has already arrived. They know how the process works because people that are already here, oh, my friend did this and got into New York. I just talked to a migrant that I met at the border maybe a year ago that crossed into Yuma, Arizona from India, and he went to Sacramento. He was held in ICE custody for I believe maybe 12 days, maybe a month. He was released. He's in Sacramento, and he was celebrating the other day the arrival of his friend from India. And I asked him, how did he get here? Was it through the southern border like you? And he said yes. And so this is what's happening. It's the reality.
One of the things we've pushed back against here as well is this talking point that to let people in this sort of mass chaos way we're doing it now is compassionate. You'll hear that word often. It's compassionate. When the reality on the ground says anything but. You've got people being hired by exploitive employers, working almost slave wages, crazy hours, just insane conditions. You've got young women being forced into essentially sex slavery. How is this compassionate? I mean, I wish we could just, like Ronald Reagan said, dump this in the ash bin of history, this notion that bringing people on a mass basis in this crazy, chaotic way is somehow compassionate when you see all these people being exploited and mistreated. I mean, how can they sustain that talking point?
Right, exactly. It's very heart-wrenching, the stories, specifically some that have come out in the New York Times about some of the children that have been exploited, like you were alluding to, in these horrible work conditions, used as child labor. Part of this goes to the role of Health and Human Services, HHS. They're tasked with helping these unaccompanied minors that come. And they're supposed to be the agency that vets the sponsors of these children. We know they're handing them off to people that are not their family or are using them for exploitative purposes, like these horrific jobs in factories across the country, which are producing snacks and cereals that we all eat. It's something that it's a full circle thing. I mean, this is part of what our society has become. And then, of course, those are the kids we know about. There are 85,000 that cannot be reached by HHS. There's no ability right now to get a hold of them. If you try, they're not answering. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Even if one is a victim of something so horrific as child sex slavery or this abusive labor practice, that's a shame.
Another story I wanted to get your thoughts on, Jenny, is the Biden administration has been doing an about-face recently about this border wall construction. They announced they were going to do 20 more miles. This is after Joe Biden said on the campaign 3 years ago that not another foot would be built under his administration, and yet here he is doing this. Mayorkas came out and said it's an imminent threat, I believe he said, that we needed to build this wall to prevent. And then he went back and said, well, that was taken out of context. What's going on here?
Exactly. They saw the backlash from the environmental groups, from their own party, from left-leaning organizations that said, what's going on here? This is not what you promised us. And then, of course, they were pressured into backing off on some of their words, but the wall's still going up in that area of the Rio Grande Valley. And at the end of the day, it's in the Federal Register that the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas called for an immediate need for this wall because of a surge in illegal immigration. And that's a huge admission there. And that's what's happening. At the same time, what happened to all of the construction materials that Trump had left for his wall? Well, what's not rotting away there is being auctioned off. And so all of that is for sale, and we're buying all new material. That's something taxpayers should know about.
Yes, they were rusting in the sun in Texas for the longest time, and then he auctions them off, and it's really bad. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, we've seen, as we discussed here, the public is really seeing it in their face now, that these policies are faulty at best. How will politicians like Biden and others, how are they going to sell these policies going forward? Because up till now, it was mostly theory. It's a great idea to be compassionate. Well, yeah, in a vacuum, but now we see what the consequences of that kind of thinking bring. How are they going to sell this to the public that seems like they're on high alert to this now?
Right. They are on high alert to this. That's a really tough thing because you have it perfectly exemplified, I think, in the White House press room, where reporters from a number of outlets in the mainstream media are pressing the Biden administration on this. And it's clear to most people that a lot of these programs are not working. And then if you want to talk about, well, they're trying to come at it from a angle of compassion, we could go back to the legal pathways that they said, have been a success. Okay, CBP1, again, the program, the phone app that they are able to use now to get appointments at ports of entry to enter the country legally, that requires that migrants are in Mexico, present in Mexico, to be able to use it. That's if the cartels didn't hijack the VPNs of these and give access to people around the world, which they have done thanks to the Washington Examiner for exposing that. But at the same time, being present in Mexico, what does it mean? Well, you have to traverse, if you're coming from beyond Mexico, which most are, you have to traverse the Darien Gap in Panama, a very dangerous area, a jungle, where women, children, men are raped, killed. There's nothing humane about the Darien, and they all know that. And then, they have to come from beyond that. And so the journey requires them, they're required to take this dangerous journey to get to Mexico, to then use this successful program that is supposed to be compassionate and is supposed to actually stop the enrichment of smugglers, which, of course, through the process of coming to Mexico is not the case at all.
We're almost out of time. Jennie, are there any other issues you're seeing out there that you think people should know about?
Yeah, I think that, Americans should just keep their eye on the ball and know exactly where their taxpayer dollars are being used when it comes to this issue. Like we said about the wall being auctioned off, the parts of the Trump wall, and then completely new materials being purchased. They're not getting the return on the taxpayer's investment there. It's going for a pretty low price at these auctions. Additionally, a lot of funding right now is being pumped into more of the migrant aspect of supporting these sanctuary cities to continue to house them, feed them, shelter them, provide all this different care through FEMA, which is, taxpayer funded. All of these different issues, I think, are really probably something that your viewers should be aware of.
And where can people find out more of your work?
You can find me on Twitter. It's just my name, and the Daily Caller, of course.
dailycaller.com?
Yes.
Very good. Jennie Taer, investigative reporter, Daily Caller News Foundation, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the podcast. If you found this information useful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you'd like to learn about the Immigration Reform Law Institute, go to irli.org. And to support the show and early, go to irli.org/podcast. You can also hear this podcast on a number of platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And be sure and check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks a lot.